Good morning. It is 11:30 a.m. on Thursday, November 14th, 2024, and this regular meeting of the Sandpoint Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee is now called to order in council chambers at City Hall, 1123 West Lake Street, Sandpoint, Idaho. I am committee chair Kate Huseman presiding. Also present are Vice Chair Molly O'Reilly and committee members Aaron Billings, Julie Perchinsky, and Reed Weber. Committee member Radley Peterson is absent, as are Evan Lewis, Jennifer Heller, and Taylor Prather. In addition to the committee, council liaison Deb Ruley is not in attendance. She's out of town. And our new staff liaison, civil engineer Brandon Staglin, is here. Brandon, will you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. It's Julie, right?
Yes.
Okay, I think you're the only one that I haven't met yet.
Yeah.
I don't know. So yeah, I'm Brandon Staglin. I'm the city engineer for the city of Sandpoint. I'm born and raised in Sandpoint. Haven't lived here my whole life. I did grow up here. And I've been practicing as a civil engineer for about 15 years. So I have a lot of experience designing this kind of stuff. You know, streets, sidewalks, that kind of stuff, and also commercial and like large multifamily residential site design that includes a lot of pedestrian infrastructure. So that's kind of where I'm at. And just briefly, my role at the city is kind of right now we're without a public works director who would normally be my boss. I'm kind of doing some of the tasks that they would be doing, like answering questions from the public and doing outreach. My main role as the city engineer is to review and approve, utility permits. I'm also, you have to get a permit from me directly in order to do any work in the right of way. So that includes if you even just repair an existing sidewalk as it is, if you install a new sidewalk, if you install a new curb, if you do any work in the street, you have to cut into the street to do utilities. All that stuff is the permitting that I do. And then I also review all the private developments for, the engineering part of, like, let's say somebody's building an apartment building or they're doing a 20 lot subdivision. I'm part of that review process. So just a quick overview of what my role is at the city. And we could talk about the duties of the committee later. I think I see that on the agenda item.
Yeah. At this time, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from our October 10th, 2024 meeting. So did all y'all get a chance to see those minutes? Just need someone to move in second. Meeting transpired as written minutes.
Move to approve the minutes.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Got it. Hot dog. All in favor? There we go. Thank you. Anyone opposed? Doesn't look like it. Motion passes and the minutes are approved as presented. So I'll now yield the floor back to Brandon for an overview of the duties of the committee as outlined in city code.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen there so that it shows up for the people on Zoom. Okay, so this is city code Title 2, Chapter 6, Section 2-4-4. This is the 2-4-3. These are the duties of the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee as adopted by council. So the first one is providing input and strategic guidance in the implementation of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Oh, that's wrong. Am I in the wrong section? I'm sorry. I was in the parks. Okay. So here we go. Title 2, Chapter 6-4. So 2-6-4. Okay, so here's the duties of the Pedestrian and Bike Committee. hold meetings in accordance with the law. That's pretty straightforward. Assist and consult in the creation of and or updates to the city master plans, including but not limited to the multimodal transportation master plan. So this is a big one. We had last done our multimodal master plan in 2021. And in that master plan, it's available on our city website. If anybody needs a link to it, I can provide it. But it essentially provides short, medium, and long-term capital projects, right? So the short terms are within 5 years, medium is within 10 years, long term within 20 years. So it stands to reason that about every 5 years or so, not exactly, but every 5 years or so, you might want to update that multimodal master plan. We're getting to that point here, probably within the next 2 to 3 years at least. We should probably this will be a staff that runs this process, but we'd hire a consultant basically to help us update our multimodal master plan. But this committee, make sure to get that right. This committee will play a big role in recommendations for the big picture about that and how we present that to city council for final approval. So that's a big one. Part C is discuss and provide advice regarding bike and pedestrian infrastructure citywide, including on development applications. So I want to be clear, my opinion is I don't want this committee to get specifically involved in review and approval of specific permits or development applications. The way that I read that section of the code is if you want to provide recommendations in general on how the city, reviews and approves development applications, like the process or anything like that, I think that's appropriate for this committee. But I want to make sure that we're not getting to the point where it's requiring that individual developments come to this committee and have to get approved before they get a permit. But that's just my opinion. I'm not the final arbiter of that, and you can add that specific thing to a future discussion item if you'd like to. So that's the one that I'm talking about, 2-6-4C. Part D is study the walkway paths and bike lane locations around the city and advise regarding necessary improvements. That's one that you could really help us out with. If this committee at some point could kind of make a running list of what improvements you'd like to see, in general, like I think there should be a sidewalk connection from this neighborhood to this neighborhood, something like that. Plus guiding, again, like the multimodal master plan and that sort of stuff. So, study the effectiveness of bike and pedestrian friendly treatments in other communities and suggest how they might be applied in Sandpoint. I was just going to show an example of that here, just really briefly. Okay, so you're familiar with that separated bike lane on Oak Street next to Matchwood. I think that's a really good example. You may not personally agree with the design or the implementation of it, but what I'm saying is I'm nearly certain that somebody did not just come up with this, didn't just come up with this concept on their own and just say, hey, I think it's a good idea if we do it like this. This almost certainly came from a design that another city implemented that somebody saw when they were in that city. And they brought it to somebody at the city of Sandpoint and said, hey, I think it'd be a good idea if we did this. So I think that's a big part of this committee is probably going to be, like if you're on vacation somewhere and you see something in another town that you think might be a good idea, I think this is the appropriate avenue to bring it to this committee so that, we can keep it in mind. Because I always tell other staff to do that as well, like in the city staff. Like they go on vacation, I just tell people, like, hey, if you see anything cool in Seattle, then we might try. We're a small town. Other people have figured it out, and let's not reinvent the wheel. So part E, That's the one we just said. Work and coordinate with the other committees, including ADA Advisory Committee. That's a big one, because obviously all the public sidewalks and pathways within the right of way are required by law to be accessible under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So there will be some cross coordination with that committee. They are in charge of everything inside the building, but the stuff out in the public right of way is kind of halfway between this committee and the ADA Advisory Committee. Advice on programs to improve public awareness and participation. That's a big one too. You could really help me out, because I always have ideas for like how I could go out and, I think that's a big part of this committee is promoting, the idea of that we want to, multimodal pedestrian and bike infrastructure in this town. And I just don't have the staff to do that. So that'll be very helpful with staff as well. Advise in establishing pedestrian and bicycle policies. That's a big one. We just got done with revising, the planning, zoning, and city council got done with revising the comprehensive plan. The next step after that is typically extensive rewrite of the city code. So that includes zoning policy, but it also includes a lot of this public infrastructure sections of the code. We can get into more detail at a future date, but as we rewrite that code, it would be appropriate for this committee to at least advise staff and probably city council on what you'd like to see in those code amendments.
Would you guys be bringing those here automatically?
Yeah, has this council asked for help on those at this point, or will they at some
No.
point, or do you know?
Not necessarily, and I don't know if they will.
And Deb's missing, so.
Yeah, she might know since she's been at city council for so long, she might have a really good instinct on that. I have not heard anybody say anything specific about that. I'm kind of thinking in the future. But I certainly don't want it to just be staff coming up with all the big picture, like code changes, like it should be input from the public. So not guaranteeing that whatever this committee says is gonna get into code, but that's the role, is to, be the citizen voice, I think, to advise on what you as a committee would like to see in those changes. Establish, promote, or support at least one event each year within the city which promotes bicycle use, pedestrian activities, sidewalks, pathways, or other safety for non-motorized transportation. That's a good one. I don't know. That seems to me like just my personal advice. That seems like a good subcommittee, but talk about that later. Just the one thing I can think of is I lived for a decade in Missoula. They had a on-staff bike and pedestrian staff member that was his whole job, was just to promote and work on bike infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure. And they would do like the bike and walk to work week competitions, and it was kind of a big deal where different businesses would sign up to compete with each other and to like log the not driving to work, basically. And there's prizes and bragging rights and that thing. And they also used to they'd set up like coffee stands and donut stands along the river trail, and like on that bike to work week, like they would just give away free stuff. So something like that, maybe something to think about if this committee could kind of organize on behalf of the city. Because again, I don't think staff has the capacity, and probably won't ever have the capacity to like fully take that over. So facilitate community outreach through engagement efforts to raise awareness about efforts to improve pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, and gather inputs from residents on potential solutions as directed by the mayor or city council. So that's kind of similar. And then the last one is make requests for funding for pedestrian and bicycle focused studies or analysis to inform city policies or actions. So that would be something that you'd probably formally decide as a group to formally request that, either city council direct staff to do it or mayor direct staff. Anyway, sorry for the long-winded explanation, but that's just wanted to go over so we all understand what the duties are and that's it.
All right, thanks. Are you Jennifer? In the record, show that Jennifer Heller has joined the meeting, please. All right, next is a report from the Cedar Street Subcommittee, and I will now yield the floor to Molly O'Reilly. Oh, there you go.
You're on mute.
Hi, all. Apologies. I took notes and I meant to send them to be included with the agenda. And I didn't. In part because there was one question and so I got distracted. So you'll get them late, but it would be good to ask Holly, well, and Brandon, their reactions, but it seemed like a really good meeting and a good discussion and basically an outstanding plan. And we talked about this a multi-use pathway on one side, and our ultimate suggestion was a 5-foot sidewalk on one side of Cedar and 7 feet on the other. And the wider one would not be a multi-use pathway, but accommodate local clumps of people, cyclists, and others. And by making it concrete over asphalt driveways rather than asphalt on asphalt, it would give drivers a little more warning that people on foot and on bike really had some right of way there and needed to be watched out for. And we had a concern about how the corners and curb ramps are going to be constructed. The city's following the AASHTO standards and making pretty wide radius corners, which means it's hard to point the curb ramps toward the direction of travel, and it enables cars to go zipping around corners. And one suggestion that came out of this was that we have a subcommittee to make a recommendation to the city on curb ramps, corners, etc. And I would volunteer to be part of that. And I will send the notes that you should have gotten for this meeting to Kate or whoever I should send them to, and you'll get them. And I apologize that you don't have them now. But Brandon, what was your take on the get together?
I will say that it was very helpful. It was very helpful to get an outside perspective. You know, Holly, you know, although she isn't an engineer, has an engineering background, she's EIT. And so we both kind of get in this mindset of, you know, engineering focused, and it was good to get the perspective, I think, of some people who don't think like engineers, which is always good. So I think we got some good advice for how to kind of guide that design effort.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
this was controversial at our last meeting, and it was controversial whether the committee would be involved early in projects like this in a way like this. And so having staff feel it was helpful is really important to our continued ability to be part of things like this before they go out for public comment. So thank you. Anybody else who was on that who's here? Erin, you were there. It would be nice to hear from you.
Yeah, I thought it was very helpful to meet with everybody and actually walk down I've been on there before, but I haven't like walked the whole stretch and seen you know, what needs to be done and also to give my input on the wider sidewalk that Molly suggested, because I do feel that the younger riders are not gonna ride in the street. They're gonna ride on the side. And you have a lot of people around farming over there. I do just have a comment because I believe the open house is today and Holly sent us the email, but I saw that nowhere else advertised. We did forward it on the school district Facebook and the Safe Routes Facebook. She said it was like on the city news, but I don't feel that people just constantly go to the city and look at news. So I just, for future, I think that should be posted more places because I don't know that many people know about it.
I don't know about it.
I don't
What is
either.
it?
I was watching for it really carefully and then I saw. So, and like I said, I only saw it on the city website. I don't know where else would be easy to post, because there's that
Well,
balance between.
Sandpoint online,
And
Bonner
Twitter.
Daily.
This can also be discussed under the general announcements. Once we get to that, we were
Oh.
still on the Cedar Street Subcommittee.
Ah, it's good to know where we can say this. Yeah. So Molly, Aaron, any more from any of you? Committee, or does that kind of summarize it? And then pursuant to that, and again, maybe you can tell me where this should go, if not now in the meeting. Are there other projects in the pipeline that this committee could provide feedback on? And if so, how do we know about them? Or do we just not know until a staff member asks us? And do staff members know that we exist as a resource? And that's a question for you, Brad.
I think that it's appropriate to have that discussion as an agendized item about, about how, how you're notified of future projects. So I'll make a note to have that on the next agenda. It's okay. We can certainly have a quick discussion about it, I think. If it's appropriate at
Under the general announcements, yes.
Okay,
okay, we can talk about it a little bit, sorry.
all right. Yeah, I'm still working on where to put it too. Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah.
Then we can go on to new business. We will now move on to the new business and a discussion on the possibility of establishing subcommittees. We will not take any action today, but can schedule the creation of any subcommittees for the next or a future meeting. I was the one who put this on the agenda because I understood that when this committee existed in the past, it used subcommittees to help advise in various areas. And if subcommittees do some of the work and study and bring things back to all of us, it just lessens the workload for all of us. So that's why that was there. And part of my reason for wanting to serve on this committee is my own experiences as a pedestrian and cyclist in Sandpoint. And I have an issue that I was discussing with Brandon before the meeting started. So is now the time to bring that up, to suggest that as something that we create a subcommittee for at the next meeting?
You could, yes, that could be a subcommittee.
Okay.
If you so choose.
All right, well, my concern is the crossing of Highway 2 and Boyer, where I have felt endangered on numerous occasions and terrified on a couple of occasions. So could we add to the agenda for the next meeting, having a subcommittee maybe address that issue and see if there are short-term or long-term fixes for that specific intersection? Maybe we should consider other ones too. I don't know.
I'll have to see agenda, yeah.
Thank you. Then, rest of you here, are there other, think about why you volunteered to join this committee. Are there other things that you think we might be helpful on, or that a subcommittee could address and research and bring back to us or provide useful input to city staff on? And I wish I could have given you warning ahead of time that I was going to ask you this, but it's more difficult than it used to be for me to inform you of everything, because everything has to be published. So I'm Sorry, I didn't give you more advance
And
notice.
this
I'm
could
putting you
also
on
be
the
turned
spot.
into an old and unfinished business item on the next agenda, if you all would like to do that.
What would be the unfinished business? Oh, creating
Establishing
subcommittees.
subcommittees.
Okay. So, yeah, that's a question. Does anyone else have things that he or she would like to? We already know we'd like to address it, have a subcommittee address, or is it something you want to think about and we address it later?
I do.
Go for it, Molly.
The one that came up at the Cedar Street tour about intersection design, curb radii, use of curb ramps, detectable warnings, blah, blah, just sidewalk and intersection design and potentially bicycle. The more open it can be for intersections, the better it will be, I think, but I don't know how open it can be.
I don't understand what you mean by it.
The
The description.
mandate of the subcommittee. What can the
Oh.
subcommittee deal with? How, I mean, if you're dealing with Boyer, you're not going to talk about division, right? But, if we're talking about intersections, it's from the edges of the right of way to the edges of the right of way. And
As
so,
opposed to just the width of the crosswalk, for example.
yeah.
Okay.
So we're crossing sidewalk, curb ramps, curb radius, bicycle treatments potentially. I haven't thought much about that.
Is it typical to have a subcommittee for each specific issue, or would it be appropriate to have a more permanent subcommittee that does intersections in general and then can address both the current one that you brought up and then kind of the generic concepts that Molly's bringing up? I don't,
I think it's
Great
up to you.
question.
It could be either. I think you get to decide what the subcommittee does.
Do we get to decide now, or do we need to make that an agenda, a publicized agenda item for the next meeting?
So we can do it two ways. If you're sure that you want to add an agenda item for the next meeting that says formation of the intersection design subcommittee or whatever, and you're ready to vote on who's gonna be and form that, you can do it that way. If you feel like you want to discuss it again one more time, like Haley said, we can just add it to unfinished business
Mm-hmm.
and then wait one more meeting. Think about it for the next, couple weeks and then at that meeting, we can add it to the next agenda. Once you have kind of come to a consensus on what committee's going to form. It's however you want to do it. Does that make sense?
I'm a little confused.
So we either need to have a discussion item, which
Uh-huh.
means we're just talking about stuff.
Okay,
And
but not
keeping it on
making
the
a
record.
decision.
Or we have to have an action item that says what you're actually, where you're doing an action, you're forming a subcommittee, you're appointing people to the subcommittee.
Okay.
I'm probably kind of talking out of my element here because I'm not the clerk, but
Okay, so
does that sound
No,
right
you're
to you?
right, you're right.
we can't take action now, is that correct?
Not on the discussion item for new business.
It has to be an action item.
so we could make it an action item.
For the next meeting?
Yes.
All right. So what do y'all think? Do we need to discuss this further, or could we make this an action item for our next meeting?
Action.
Yeah, I'd say action.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that we want to add an action item for the next meeting that is formation of the subcommittee on intersection design elements or broadly.
Yeah.
And not a specific one about Boyer and Highway 2, or did we want to do?
I think
I think
more
they get
generally
to
it's fine. Boyer and Highway 2 could fit in there.
Yeah.
Okay,
And,
so,
and any other.
Yeah, because
hot
other people
spots.
may cross other places
Right.
frequently and have comparable concerns.
Mhm.
Well, like now that we have a couple weeks to think about it, we can all come back. with a
Right,
list.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm seeing here publicized
Let me ask
meeting.
a question here. Let's say next meeting, we get into something where clearly a subcommittee would be helpful. do we have to wait a month to discuss it and another month to create the subcommittee? Or can we put a standing item on our agenda that we will always discuss subcommittees, formation of subcommittees or something to mean that we're not dealing with a 3-month thing?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to it, Molly.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
If I may address, Melissa Ward, City Clerk for the record.
Thank you.
You could put something a little more generic on your next agenda, for instance, that is, formation of subcommittees. And then if you make a decision about the conversation today, that's the purpose of the conversation today, is what subcommittees at this point do you think that we could, form and use? And so at the next meeting, you could have that on your agenda to actually take action to form those subcommittees. As far as, like, say you're having a conversation in the middle of a meeting or during your roundtable at a next meeting or an upcoming meeting, and something comes up and think, hey, a subcommittee would be really helpful for this. Maybe we should form a subcommittee. Then you could simply put that on your next agenda to do so. Assuming it's not some kind of an upcoming project that has a deadline, hopefully not, hopefully it's something that you'll have time for the next month to create that. The way it works is if you're going to form a subcommittee, it should be an action item. There should be a decision and basically, because there isn't only 1 or 2 people creating that in the committee as a whole is creating that. Therefore, you're basically making a decision on it. And if it's a decision, it should be an action item on the agenda so that all committee members are aware, staff is aware, council is aware, the public is aware that you're taking action because you are a public body.
So to clarify off of that, perhaps it would make more sense from a ability to take action quickly to have a long-standing generic subcommittee
Precisely.
that does intersections
Precisely.
and then
Yeah.
leave that
Good
permanently.
point,
in
Jen.
place.
And that is the way that I know at least one other citizen advisory board for the city has been doing it, and they're kind of longstanding the last 2 or 3 years. They've been meeting and successfully using subcommittees. They're more generic, broad subcommittees.
Okay.
One dealing with a category, or an area that the committee handles and deals with regularly.
So maybe, and this is just me spitballing here, but maybe next time, maybe we should come back and form one subcommittee on intersections, because that seems to be a popular topic, and maybe one looking into the future. In the coming year, there's going to be staff coming in with zoning questions, and we could have a standing subcommittee that is available for when those questions pop up periodically. Or is that not a good idea?
Zoning might be not the best example, as we have a planning and zoning commission who handles all of those sorts of things.
I think I'm using the wrong
Yeah.
word with zoning, but like the code changes that are coming in, you said maybe sometime in the
Reviewing
future.
all
there might
the
be-
code
Yeah, I
changes
think
that
I threw out
Brandon
zoning.
mentioned, yeah.
I think I just want to distinguish between, form the committees that you want, and you can put standing, items on every agenda, or whichever ones you want, that say report from the subcommittee. So that they get to talk about whatever they want at the end of every meeting, if that's what you're asking.
Kind of, yeah. I'm trying to think of like topics that like, to some degree, it almost sounds like if we're very purposeful now and make 2 or 3 generic subcommittees to be like, during the course of the next year, we see these being topics that might come up that need faster action on the part of, 1 or 2 or 3. We have to have less than 3, right?
You can have 4, you can
You
have
can
up
have
to
4.
4 on a
Okay.
committee, subcommittee. And the subcommittee never makes decisions.
Correct, yeah.
They just go out and gather information, bring back to the body, report it, and then it's the entire group that makes the decisions.
But they can
Yes,
make
it's
recommendations,
recommendations.
right?
Yeah, they make recommendations to the subcommittee, makes recommendations to the committee as a whole, and then the committee as a whole votes and has an action item to make a recommendation for instance, to council or to staff.
But like the subcommittee could come in and already say, we want an action item at this meeting.
Yes,
Here's a report, and you could already be taking action
Yes.
instead of
You-
having,
you can put that on the
At the
agenda.
next meeting,
instead of having a meeting for information.
Yes, no,
Then-
you can do it all at once, information with action. And if you have an action item on the agenda, you're not obligated to take action. That's another thing.
Okay.
So if you think it's possible you may take action, go ahead and put it on the agenda so that's agendized, and you can do that if
Yeah,
you.
you don't need the subcommittees to do that too. If you just tell me to
Yeah.
put it on the agenda while you're having these discussions, just tell me to put it on the agenda. And, you know, where you're not, like she said, you're not taking an action item on it, so you can vote it down, you know. If the majority doesn't want it, then you vote it down, or you just don't vote on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah,
Thanks.
appreciate that.
Very helpful.
So, go ahead, Molly.
There's another topic. In the 15 years that the committee existed before, it looked at development plans and made recommendations. And it's an advisory committee. It only looks at pedestrian bicycle issues, but it learned a lot. And there is a checklist existing now from that, and it potentially can be improved. And I don't know whether just putting review and affirm the checklist, you know, or whether we want a subcommittee. We've got at least one architect now and people involved in development to look at it at a subcommittee level with an eye to what are we missing and how important are these things? Yeah, I mean, we learned about the ATM being in the drive-through and drainage of roof water, heated roof water onto the sidewalk where it turns into ice and, you know, a variety of things. So there are details that are really important. And if we're not another pair of eyes, I think it's especially important that we have a checklist that we have endorsed and send forward and make sure
So,
staff is with us.
Molly, are you suggesting that we review the checklist that was made previously and then present it to city staff? I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, let's review it, decide if it looks pretty complete or if it needs enough work that an ad hoc subcommittee should chew it over and work. And yeah, I think we should make sure that city staff is with us. They were previously. So yeah.
Can you provide us a copy of that before the next meeting? And can we put that on the agenda for this whole committee to review that at the next meeting?
Works for me, sure.
Does that work for you, Haley and Brandon? Is that an appropriate way to address this?
Okay, so you want a discussion item on the recommended
review,
checklist.
yeah,
Okay.
that
So
Molly will provide, yeah.
Okay. I'll put it on the agenda for next week.
Molly,
Next month.
Next month, sorry.
were you asking just for review of the checklist, or were you thinking that this was also a potential subcommittee direction?
Well, it occurred to me as a subcommittee direction, but I think that the whole committee could decide once they look at it and think about it and think about developments that have met it and not met it and whatnot, whether a subcommittee is needed or whether it's just a review and endorse or whatever. Can we leave it?
So what
I'd say,
Sorry, Reed, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think it would be good to have it as a subcommittee to allow for that discussion and to meet more intermittently than once per month, because those projects usually come in at kind of random times and might not work with the overall committee's timing if it's just that one meeting. So I think as a subcommittee, it could be a good solution. And how it fits in with the public process, I think we'd still need to suss that out with it being publicly noticed or not, and if it's prior to that or after that, how that would work.
So would it be sufficient to, when we discuss the addition of the creation of subcommittees at our next meeting, we include so far one on intersections and one on the checklist for developments. Is that where we're at this
Kind
point?
of, yeah.
Anyone else have other things specifically that they might want to add or?
I've got one more on the, and we kind of already talked about it in the first meet or second meeting, but just like a subcommittee on the review of the multimodal transportation plan and having kind of a more cohesive outcome with recommendations from a subcommittee towards what steps could be taken in that plan, I think could be a good additional subcommittee.
And I think that might line up well with my botched attempt at earlier at saying having maybe like a smaller group of people to have not casual, but easier interactions with as the codes are getting reviewed, like to have a resource staff that could then come to the committee and be like, okay, we've had these conversations. What does the committee think?
The code review, the code changes may be a while,
Yeah,
so be aware of that. Multimodal transportation master plan may be a couple of years, so just be aware of that. You're welcome as this committee to form whatever subcommittees. For a couple.
When you say maybe a couple of years before we review and revise the MMTP?
Yes.
Okay, but in that time, our subcommittee could be becoming familiar with its content.
The existing one, absolutely.
Right,
Right.
and starting to work towards.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that makes sense.
Okay, so if I may, is that okay?
Please.
Okay. Right now, I've got 3 action items for subcommittees on the next agenda. Intersection design subcommittee, development review subcommittee, and multimodal transportation master plan subcommittee. Does that sound right to everybody?
Yeah, it does to me. Great.
Is there anything else? It's the duties that.
Are we gonna need a subcommittee for the event, like the work? Or is that gonna be the whole committee that just goes out and helps?
We could
I mean,
talk
we do
about
the
it.
bike to school, so we can maybe coordinate it with that, but.
You're talking about a different we than this body here, I bet.
Well, he said that's our duty
Oh,
to do an
okay.
event and
Mhm.
possibly a bike to work. Is that
Okay.
gonna need to be a subcommittee or is that?
Right, at some point.
Cause that is in May, so I mean, it's not that.
It doesn't have to be the bike.
Somebody had already mentioned that,
Mhm.
Would it make sense to have an event planning subcommittee? We can have 3 to 4 subcommittees. That would be the 4th. There's only 9 of us and 3 aren't here. Can we actually populate that many subcommittees?
I think people can participate in multiple.
Yeah,
areas.
they would need to. I
Mhm.
would think so. Are we up for that? Why don't you at least add it to the agenda, because then we can decide on that at the next meeting if we need to.
These come before them as action items.
Correct.
And again, you're more than willing, or you're more than welcome to get to that action item, say we need more discussion, let's move, let's
Right.
table.
So that was the new business. Any other new business? We wandered into general announcements and comments, I think. And I have under that publicized meeting, how we are notified of future projects. I made those notes as you were speaking.
Yeah.
Can you help me remember what I was referring to there, Ben?
Yeah, so, I have a, discussion item also that I'm adding to the next agenda.
Mm-hmm,
That's a discussion of how capital projects will be brought to to this committee
okay.
for comment, for review,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. So that'll be a discussion item for the next one. It could also involve private development, as Molly was suggesting, so it's up to you. But we can have a deeper conversation, or we can talk about it now, but
I guess if. What I will say is, I think Reed touched on this a little bit. My understanding of law is that when you submit for a building permit or a site development permit,
This is when a developer, not one of us.
yeah, I'm sorry, when I say you, when
Okay.
somebody from the public submits a building permit or a site development permit to staff, once they've submitted the application and paid their fees, it's public record unless there's a reason for it not to be. So in other words, if there's an ongoing development that is under review by city staff, we're reviewing it for code, we're in that process, we have not approved it yet. And somebody calls and says, hey, I want to do a public records request and I want to know what. I heard through the grapevine that they're trying to build something here. What do the plans look like? Those documents that they submitted can be shared with the public. So the reason I say that is because you have the ability to look at the submitted documents for projects as they're in that process as early as soon as they paid the fees and their application is complete, just like any other member. So be aware of that. The capital projects, I know those are different. So when I say capital projects, I mean not private development. I mean the ones that the city does. We get a grant or we take money from the general fund, like the Cedar Street project. It's a capital project. So this is a new committee that nobody that, as far as I know, that neither Holly nor I worked here when there was committees. So this is a totally new thing. But we have both talked about how we want to get this committee involved in those city projects from as soon as possible. So we can bring those plans to this committee probably earlier than we do an open house to the public. I don't know if that's helpful as a discussion of how the process works.
And
Well, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think part of the reason you wrote it down originally
Mhm.
was because we were trying to figure out how the public was supposed to know about the open house. And if there are ways that we can better publicize the open houses, because we were having a hard time finding it, even though we knew it was happening. And that can go with next session's discussion, but I'm curious how what staff are currently doing to advertise those to the public, and are there ways we can improve on that for kids who go through those areas to get to school or other such?
That
Because then
makes
we were
sense.
starting to loft ideas like, what about Sandpoint Online? What about the reader? What about,
Right.
but yeah, I think that was what you wrote it down for
Yeah.
initially.
Madam Chair, are we out of the new business section with discussing subcommittees?
Yes, she had,
Well, we're
kind of
reverting back to it on occasion, but I would say yes, we're at the committee roundtable.
Yeah.
The problem is in the discussion of
Okay, are you-
general announcements and comments, we kind of wander back to the subcommittees, so it's hard to tease those out.
You could still talk about the subcommittees. She
Absolutely.
just wants to know where we're at.
Just-
One question is whether the city has a policy on how it notifies the public of meetings. Do they have a checklist that they go through, or does it just happen? So if there is any kind of a policy or procedure, we would like to see a copy of that at our next meeting so that we can make suggestions if we think something might enhance it. I'm assuming the city wants people to know about meetings. It's not just trying to satisfy the law.
I can answer what we do now. As far as I know, we don't have a written policy on exactly what the process that we go by to notify the public. I think that's because it really matters on the project, and
when you try to apply a broad stroke, like you have to do this meeting this day and you have to do this, it gets, there's some unintended consequences because there are projects that you don't care about that we do all the time, and it's hard to separate those. You know, we do water main relocation projects that are out in the asphalt that maybe you care about on this committee, but it's not part of this, you know, so it's not just, we're not just doing sidewalk projects here.
Sure.
We're doing all sorts of projects. We're doing projects at the parks. I will say what we do now generally is, like for this public open house, we posted it on the city's website. The Facebook thing is a little difficult because the city has a Facebook page, but the mayor it controls it, who posts on it. And I guess leadership made the decision that we're not discussing stuff on Facebook in the comments because it became too volatile.
Yeah.
So that's the issue. I'm not saying that we can't post it on Facebook, but it's not something that staff can just go and post on Facebook. So
How
I
about,
I can bring that back to the mayor and ask him if there's a way to streamline that.
how about a press release to the Bee, to the reader, to Sandpoint Online?
Yeah, we do that sometimes for projects. And again, it's project dependent, unfortunately. There's not a written policy.
But
Depends on what the
houses,
project is.
it seems
If
like
you want the public's input, we should be getting it out to the public.
It seems the city may not want public input on water lines.
No, but this is an open house on a reconstruction of a street.
Right, whereas it may want public input on pedestrian walkways, transportation issues. Things that matter
Well,
to our lives because we're biking and walking and driving places. When we're biking and walking and driving, a water line doesn't make, where the water line is doesn't make so much difference, but where the sidewalk is and the crosswalks makes a lot of difference. I see your point that you couldn't maybe have a blanket policy for all the things you have to decide.
but maybe for an open house. I mean, that they don't have open houses for water mains,
Right,
but they do for bigger things that are going to affect people's lives. So maybe a policy for open houses. Is that, what do you think, Kate? I interrupted you.
that makes sense to me. I mean, obviously, we can. I don't know whether now we can make a decision that we're going to officially recommend to the city that it publicize open houses in this way. We can have. Well, and almost, if we wanted to make a recommendation to the city, it would have to be an action item for our next meeting, would it not?
Yeah, but you also, the action item also needs to include what the recommended policy is. If you're gonna recommend a policy, you need to get that nailed down first before
Okay,
you add it to the agenda. So that it can be tacked along with it. Does that make sense?
that makes a lot of sense. And I don't feel quite clear enough on what the recommend policy would be at this meeting to say, to put it on the agenda for next week or next month.
What about we discuss it again next month and we come up with a few things that'll go into the minutes that we do feel should be included in that? Like the city's Facebook page for an open house. They have an email list that they use for some things. Maybe open houses should be sent as an email, press releases, and we could list who those should go to. And
You don't have to brainstorm it all now, Molly. I
No,
think
I
it
know,
makes
but,
sense
you
to
know,
have
if
it
we-
as a discussion item, and
we
then
don't wanna-
once we discuss it.
I
Next
just don't want to lose the
month.
progress we've made.
That's a good point.
Just,
But once we discuss it next month, then at next month's meeting, we can make it an action item for the following meeting. So, yeah, I don't know if you're taking notes, but Jen here is taking fabulous notes. So, and Molly, if you could write down what, you know, what you've thought of at this point, so you have that to bring to the next meeting, I think that would be a great idea also. If anyone else has other things they would like to be written down now, to say now, that's great. Otherwise, we could add them to the discussion in a month.
Who on staff is responsible, like say that one of the things we decide to loft as an option is a press release when there's an open house. Who on staff would be responsible for that? What's the structure for how that happens?
So right now, Holly would be responsible for sending that out. Be working to send that out if that was the policy. Technically, right now in Public Works, because there's no Public Works director, I'm the highest person in Public Works, so those capital projects are my responsibility as well. So, I'm sorry, did I do something wrong, Melissa?
Well, that's good because on Cedar Street, one of the things Holly said is that she wants to do open houses and public outreach really well. And would appreciate our input. So I think this is going to be great.
Madam Chair.
Please.
Just to clarify a little bit about press releases in general with the city. So as Brandon correctly mentioned that staff will draft a press release. The subject matter experts will do that generally to ensure that all the correct information is included there. Those are reviewed by the mayor's office. And so the mayor clears those. So staff will generate generally a press release or draft one. The mayor takes a look at it, finalizes it, and then it's the clerk's office who actually pushes all of that out to the media.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's
So if in our discussion, we decided that a press release would be an appropriate way to publicize an open house, we would suggest some content for that to the appropriate city staff person? Is that how that would work?
Yeah, I think that's something that can just probably go through Brandon. You know, if it's something official, you want to make a recommendation to staff on, you could certainly vote on that if it's an action item on your agenda. But for the most part, staff makes the decision about, and the mayor's office makes the decision about
Press release.
when press releases are
Mhm.
issued and the content of those press releases. Okay. If you have recommendations for content, you know, you could certainly go through Brandon for that.
But correct me if I'm wrong, Melissa, this committee could also draft a formal recommendation to council and present that to council. Is that right? On anything really? Recommendation to council.
I would say that, I wouldn't say anything. You gotta put me on the spot.
Sorry.
I think that if something, are you talking about a press release specifically?
No, I'm just
Okay.
saying if there's a lot of discussion about, we think staff should do this, right? So it seems to me like they have two options. You can recommend it to staff through me as the staff liaison, or you can formally recommend that council direct us to do
We're
something.
kind of wading into operations here too, which is probably not a great place to
Sorry.
go, but basically the mayor's office, it is the mayor. He's the operations chief for the city. He directs staff. And staff does their jobs based on their job descriptions and what they're directed to do by their supervisors and ultimately the mayor. So if this committee had a concern that there was there was some issue with what staff, the work that staff is doing or what they're being tasked with doing, I would recommend that you just simply relay those concerns to Brandon. In general, it doesn't need to be an action item or a recommendation necessarily, so that he can take those up with the powers that be. Okay, and he can report back to you.
less work for the.
I don't think we would. I don't I'm kind of with Melissa. I don't think we should get into content unless some come out that we think just weren't any good, but we haven't had that yet. But I think, if it involves pedestrians and bicycles, maybe it goes to the school district. Additionally, we might have some recommendations for where those would go in addition to the regular reader, Sandpoint online, radio stations, whatever, et cetera. So, yeah.
And I don't think that's something, Madam Chair, I don't think that's something that would necessarily need an action item from the committee. Like if you just happen to say, hey, this is coming up, it's coming up, it's a project you've been looking at, maybe taking a look at, and somebody has an idea like, hey, can we make sure that these folks are notified? These organizations are notified. You can just simply.
We can
mention
ask
it.
Brandon.
Just to mention
Yeah.
it to
And I'll
Brandon.
make sure it's done.
Precisely.
And
Precisely.
conceivably, if we thought that there should be additional forms of publicizing an open house, we could suggest that to
Certainly.
Brandon.
You could just,
Maybe
simply make
Maybe
those
we're getting
suggestions without
deeper
it being
into
a
the
formal
weeds than we need
recommendation.
to here.
Yeah.
Unless we really want it to be like, these are formally the things that we would like as an official process every time, then maybe making.
Yeah, there again, though, probably in general for press release issuance.
Yeah.
And those sorts of things, those are things the mayor's office is gonna make decisions on. For various reasons.
Yeah.
Facebook postings, like Brendan mentioned, the clerk's office does those, as long as we're, they're recommended. They go through the mayor for approval to post, but then the clerk's office does as soon as we have that direction from the mayor to go ahead and post those. Most of these things, this, for instance, I believe Haley posted on Facebook already about this open house. I'm pretty sure she did.
Unless it was just recently, it wasn't
You
posted.
didn't see it?
Because we tried to share it, we
Okay.
wanted to share it off of Facebook
Yeah,
with the school district, but we just took Holly's email and copied and then put it
Gotcha.
on our Facebook.
yeah.
So
I thought I saw it come out, but anyway, if we're notified, then we post those things. And if
it's
it's
But you
today,
get
yeah,
your-
it's right, it's 12
But
to
you
1
get
and
your
3 to 5.
approval for
It's
that
actually right now.
from the
Yeah, they're
mayor.
one
Yes.
right now.
Yeah, yeah. The mayor is the city's PI. The mayor is our
Yeah, sorry.
Personal information.
public information officer is what this stands for.
Okay.
And the mayor is currently the city's PIO.
Well, we can
Those things.
suggest and he can delete, he can say, no, the school district doesn't need to know about this. No, the committee members don't need to be notified. No, blah, 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 But if we have a list and he can delete from that list, of course, he can do anything he wants, but
Yes. And we're happy to get anything out to anybody and everybody who, for open house, for instance, who might want to know. So yeah, obviously, if you have recommendations as to specific organizations or folks that those need to go to, just let Brandon know and we'll just.
Yeah, so case by case. So a good example of that is the Pine and Fifth signal, right? Where we moved the stoplight, just got finished. We did the open house for that. Staff decided, the people that live on that one block of Pine Street are all gonna lose their on-street parking as part of this project. So it's probably a good idea if we talk to them early on. So we actually I think we mailed specific notices to those addresses only that said, hey, there's an open house here. It's gonna affect your neighborhood. Show up. So those are like great recommendations. Like if there's something we're missing, on Cedar Street, we're probably, I can't remember if Holly notified the people that live directly on it or what, but for example, if you're like, well, I know that there's a school route that, there's a bunch of kids that walk along that stretch, but they're not technically in that neighborhood. I think we should send out mailers to all these people. Just let us know. I mean, it's easy. It's as easy as that. Not guaranteeing that we're gonna do it, but.
Yeah, we may be just getting into the weeds here as we try to understand what is required by law. I know I am, so, but that's useful and so it seems like for our next meeting, we could have as a discussion item, how to publicize open houses. And the result of that discussion could be making suggestions to Brandon. Does that sound
Yes,
correct?
and I have it on the agenda for next
Power
week.
10,
Two
okay.
discussion items. One is, Molly's gonna present possibly a potential development review checklist,
Mhm.
recommended development review checklist. That's a discussion item. The other one is recommended public open house policy.
Okay,
So we can talk about what you think the city, you would recommend the city do with their open house.
and could you remind me the 4 subcommittees we are considering
Yes.
next month also?
Intersection design elements,
Mhm.
development review,
Okay.
multimodal master plan,
Mm.
sorry, multimodal transportation master plan,
M,
MMTMP.
oh, it's got another M
There's
now.
lots of M's. in that.
Okay,
It's more than 50% M's.
okay,
The last one is event planning.
that's right. Okay,
So that's, yeah, just a general subcommittee for planning that one or more events that you're requiring.
May I suggest another discussion item for next month, and that's funding requests? Because if we are going to make any funding requests of the city, the staff used to start kind of working on that in February. Is that still the case?
Are you talking about like applying for grants? Or
No, I think we ought to have a good sidewalk inventory. That would be a funding request, and that's part of what is in our description of things we're supposed to do.
so if. But I guess I'm confused, Molly, because I would think we would first have to decide that we wanted a sidewalk inventory and then decide that we wanted to request funding for it. I don't understand. I
That's
wouldn't,
why she's bringing it.
but I guess I don't see funding requests as a general category in itself. I see it as an offshoot of particular issues or projects.
It was the last item on the list of our responsibilities.
we'll bring it up here.
Request funding for student farm bike question. Did, yeah. Erin, thank you for coming. See you next month.
Yeah, last item, K, make
Yeah.
requests for funding for pedestrian and bicycle focused or analysis to inform city policy and act.
So you're saying timeline wise, if funding requests happen in February, we need to start talking about it now so that we can send.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that-
I guess, I don't see how we can make funding requests until we're knowing what we're requesting the funding for. Molly,
Well,
maybe you can,
it now occurs to me that that might be a really important thing for the Transportation Plan Committee. Because there was a really good inventory of streets for the multimodal transportation plan, which had more M's than I just gave it. But there was no really good sidewalk inventory. So that is when, unless the city's going back to ask the voters for funding again, that is when a really good sidewalk inventory would matter for that.
Where does
So
the
maybe
fund-
that's just a topic for that subcommittee.
for those of us who don't know, where does funding for those types of things come from? Those are special awards, or we apply for grants, or do they come from general budget, or how does that?
That one would be that the city will budget for updating the master plan. And we would be asking that they include a really good sidewalk inventory in that budget for that updating the master plan.
so I see where that issue may go before the MMTMP committee.
Yeah, yes.
But then the general issue of requesting funding as a discussion item in and of itself, I still don't see what that's for unless it is pursuant to, like, we request funding for the event, and then what the event subcommittee suggests that we set funding. Yeah, funding in and of itself, I'm not sure how that works as a discussion item.
We're probably too new to need that a whole lot right now, but things will come up. It used to be, this committee used to have a standing budget of $400 or something. I think if the events committee does a bike to work, they will probably find a lot of sponsorships and not need a lot of funding. You know, I mean, getting the community involved at a sponsor level is an important part of making it really integral to the community rather than our just doing it alone.
Would it be appropriate to have an agenda item be a discussion of or asking staff to explain to us where funding comes from for ped bike projects and what lead times might be? Is that, is that something you could do? And is there someone on staff who could explain to us the various sources of funding for ped bike projects?
Yeah. And the item about the development checklist, I think, please include a few words about the role of this committee in the pedestrian bicycle aspects of developments. And it may be that that staff thinks, oh, well, if this development doesn't meet all the things that we require and the committee recommends, that then the committee will look at it and see if they can improvise somehow to make it better. I don't know. It was Cody Van Dyke, the public work director, who set us up to be part of the look at developments as another set of eyes and expertise, and we're only advisory. So our recommendations went to staff. Staff included them when they went to planning and zoning, or they didn't. They accepted some, they didn't accept some, and it was a positive working relationship, but the city has grown and changed.
So that is a discussion item already for
Well,
the next.
you know, yeah,
I'm sorry, it looks like I'm looking at you.
I
I'm
know.
looking at Jason because of the camera. I'm sorry, but I'm trying to check with Jason. We have this as a discussion item or next.
Well,
I
yeah,
have
I'm
sources of funds
including
for
it in
both.
the development checklist discussion item, just, you know, and the role of the committee in the pedestrian and bicycle elements of private development. Yeah,
So Jason, I think what Molly's saying is that on the other agenda item, discussing the role of the ped bike committee in the
yeah.
development,
with
development checklist.
Yeah.
That is on the agenda for next meeting. Is that
The
correct?
development review checklist is on the agenda, and I have it written here that Molly's gonna make a presentation about what development checklist she's talking about.
Okay.
So if you want me to change that, I can.
Well, Molly, would you want to also discuss at that point the role of the committee relative to that checklist?
Yeah,
Okay, so do we need to add anything to the agenda that, or if she's discussing it anyway, can she say whatever she feels?
I don't think I need to add anything.
Okay.
You don't need to explain like a whole paragraph
Okay.
of description for every agenda.
All right.
Just need to say what the discussion, especially on a discussion. Right?
Okay, so Molly, are you comfortable then that you will have an opportunity to address that issue at the next meeting?
absolutely. Thank you so much, both of you, all of you.
And maybe this is just as good a place to add that Molly's going to be chairing the next meeting because I will be out of the country and I'm not at all confident that I will be able to zoom in. If I can, that's cool, but I can't guarantee that, so it's more appropriate for her to prepare to chair it than for me at this point.
Okay.
Are there any other general announcements or comments at this point? Concerns? Reed, you got any out there in Zoom land? Okay. All right, with no further business on the agenda, this meeting is now adjourned at 12:45 p.m. Thank you all.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Everyone. Like.